Welcome to week 6 of 3 Books to Go. I'm Christine with the Cold Lake Public Library, and I'm back again to make some more recommendations for you guys. And this week I wanted to talk about things that relate to gardening. Of course, I kind of took that as a very loose theme because once I started thinking about the gardening theme, I had lots of different ideas of different ways to go. So it's actually more like 3 segments to go and maybe more like, I don't know, 6, 8 books to go. Okay, but it's okay. I'm not going to go into super detail about each of the books. It's still going to be about the same length of video. But in all cases, they're things you can borrow with your Cold Lake Library card. And I did go in a couple of different directions. So I have I have fiction, I have some gardening books, and I have some very local books to recommend. And you'll see what I mean when we get in there. So let's get started. The first gardening book I have for you guys is actually fiction. It's still a little bit early to really dig into our gardens. See what I did there? So we can always start by getting into fiction instead, with a book like Garden Spells by Sarah Addison Allen. From the author website. Sarah Addison Allen brings the full flavor of her Southern upbringing to bear on her fiction, a captivating blend of magical realism, heartwarming romance, and small-town sensibility. Born and raised in Asheville, North Carolina, Sarah grew up with a love of books and an appreciation of good food. In college, she majored in literature because, as she puts it, I thought it was amazing I could get a diploma just for reading fiction. It was like being able to major in eating chocolate. Garden Spells is her first novel and the first in the Waverly Family series, and it's what the author calls Southern fried magical realism. First Frost continues their story. The description of Garden Spells from Goodreads includes, the women of the Waverly family, whether they like it or not, are heirs to an unusual legacy, one that grows in a fenced plot behind their Queen Anne home in Bascom, North Carolina. There, an apple tree bearing fruit of magical properties looms over a garden, filled with herbs and edible flowers that possess the power to affect anyone who eats them in curious ways. For nearly a decade, Claire Waverly has lived in the house alone, embracing the spirit of the grandmother who raised her. Using her grandmother's mystical culinary traditions, Claire has built a successful catering business, and a carefully controlled and utterly predictable life, upon the family's peculiar gift for making life-altering delicacies. Lilac jelly to engender humility, for instance, or rose geranium wine to call up fond memories. Claire's rebellious sister, Sydney, had freed herself long ago from their small town's constraints. Garden Spells reveals what happens when Sydney returns to Bascom with her young daughter, turning Claire's routine existence upside down. As the sisters reconnect and learn to support one another, each finds romance where she least expects it, while Sydney's child Bay discovers both the safe home she's always longed for and her own surprising gifts. With the help of their elderly cousin, Evanelle, who is endowed with her own uncanny skills, the Waverly women redeem the past, embrace the present, and take a joyful leap into the future. I read this one quite a few years ago, and I remember it as a light, very sweet summer read. It's very close in feel to Practical Magic, the movie version, more so than the book by Alice Hoffman, which the movie was based on, because of the big, beautiful house, the family of women with certain mysterious abilities, the recipes or spells with plants from their own garden, estranged sisters who get back together, and living in a small town that is initially afraid of them, but eventually embraces them. Garden Spells and several of Sarah Addison Allen's other titles are available online with your library card through Overdrive. In this second segment, I'm going to talk about gardening advice or instruction books, the kind of thing you think of when you think of gardening books. I thought I'd start just by showing you quickly how to browse in our different platforms, so Cloud Library, Hoopla, and Overdrive. They all have slightly different ways to do that, so you can see on the screen, as I'm talking, how I'm finding all of the titles with gardening attached to them in each of those different platforms. For something like gardening, you might not have a specific book in mind, so to peruse what's there the same way you would in person in the library, you use the subject headings that the platforms create. This allows you to discover new authors, and sometimes, depending on how the platforms catalog items, it might lead you to more garden-adjacent fiction, like we talked about in the first segment, or down all kinds of other rabbit holes you didn't necessarily expect. I can see by looking in Overdrive that you guys have already found a lot of the gardening books. Most things are out and have a wait list, and it is gardening season after all. But I don't want you to feel discouraged because there are gardening books on all the platforms we offer, so make sure you check them all. It might be a good way to start exploring a platform you don't use as often. Check Read Alberta, that will have more local books for sure. Plus, the authors that I'm talking about have a lot of online resources to help get you started. So the two that I wanted to recommend today are both ones that we have on our shelves at the South Branch and have been very popular with our patrons. Both of these authors have a few books, and they're all available on Hoopla, so that's where you'll go to check them out. The first one is Veggie Garden Remix by Nikki Jabbour. Nikki Jabbour is based out of Halifax, so she's a Canadian gardener, and she has branched out, sorry, I can't help it, into a lot of different mediums, including her own website, Savvy Gardening, as well as writing for magazines, hosting a radio show called The Weekend Gardener in Halifax, and being active on social media channels like Instagram and YouTube. She has 3 books, but the one that I'm sharing is Veggie Garden Remix, which gives suggestions for different types of veggies to grow in your home garden. It's aimed at getting us out of our gardening ruts and experimenting with new varieties of veg. It's beautifully laid out too, so it's a nice book for browsing and clear, which makes it a good reference. The second one I want to mention is by Tammy Hartung, and it's called Homegrown Herbs. I like her other title too, Wildlife Friendly Vegetable Gardener, because it has really sweet illustrations and gives some good advice for how to coexist with the creatures we share our yards with. But Homegrown Herbs is great because it's a massive resource, and herbs are something you can grow, whether you have a huge garden or just a tiny pot on a windowsill. This is an in-depth guide, and it shows you everything that you need to know about planting, caring for, harvesting, drying, and using more than 100 herbs. There are instructions for making herbal bath soaps, custom seasoning blends, homemade creams and butters, and more. It's another nice one to flip through too, with lots of photos and very clear instructions. In this last segment, the books I want to share are actually about wild plants rather than cultivated ones. I feel like I should just put in this quick disclaimer at the start. You guys are totally clear. I work at the library. I'm not an expert at foraging for safe or medicinal plants. I'm recommending a couple of books on that subject that have local relevance and that have been really popular with patrons in the Cold Lake area. So what I'm saying is make sure you know what you're doing before you pick that mushroom. The best thing to do is, of course, to have a knowledgeable guide show you the ropes. So with that out of the way, the first book that I want to recommend today is called The Path to Wild Foods by Sandra Walker. It's available with your library card on the Read Alberta platform. Sandra Walker is an ethnobotanist and an educator who lives in Saskatoon. She works with local nature centers, schools, and Indigenous organizations. This is the publisher's description of the book. Taking a refreshing and practical approach, The Path to Wild Foods is an ethical field guide and recipe book that promotes respect for the natural world and for the cultures that effectively use it. Written by an accomplished ethnobotanist and educator, this book will rekindle an interest in natural foods, including taking best advantage of nature's pharmacy for medicinal plant use. Learn to feed and heal yourself with the natural plants all around you. It rekindles an interest in wild foods with an appreciation of the adventure and flavors to be found along the way. Examines respect for nature and finding ways to feed ourselves without the supermarket. Includes various plant types from trees and shrubs to herbs and wetland plants. Describes a variety of parkland and prairie plants along with potential uses and recipes. Identifies poisonous plants to avoid. Discusses respect for nature, growing plants in an ecologically supportive way, and it explores the wisdom of Indigenous teachings and learnings. And I'm also including a link down below for a 5-minute CBC interview that she did last year, just to give you a little sense of her voice. The other book that I couldn't not talk about today was one that's very, very local. It really doesn't get any more local than this. It is called Before Doctors, and it's a booklet that was put together by the Youth Learning and Resource Center at the Cold Lake Native Friendship Center. It goes over 35 different plants that grow in our area and gives some of their traditional Denisutline medicinal uses. The illustrations in it were done by students at the Learning Center. This book doesn't give recipes or in-depth information, but it's a great resource. It'll get you started with the identification of the plants that grow right here. It might also give a healthy appreciation for things that might be considered weeds, but in fact have a lot of value as medicines. Once again, the best way to learn how to actually harvest and use these plants would be to go out on the land with a teacher. There's really no substitute for passing on plant knowledge in that way. This book unfortunately isn't available as an online resource, but there are a few paper copies in the library system, so keep it in mind for when we open our doors again. Another option, if you'd like to own a copy, is to purchase it directly from the Friendship Center. Check with the Friendship Center director, Agnes Gendron, but I believe that they still have copies for sale. You can always just drop in during non-pandemic times and join them for lunch on Thursdays at noon. There's a free community lunch every Thursday, often soup and bannock or spaghetti, or a bigger feast on special days, and it's open to everyone. I'm there too, having lunch and offering up a pop-up library service. hope that was helpful and that you'll find something no matter what level of gardener you are, whether you're an armchair gardener who's just looking for gardening themed fiction, or if you're like me, an enthusiastic amateur who doesn't really know what they're doing but gets excited when things sprout and grow, or if you're an expert. And no matter what level, I also will just say again, this one's really worth checking out. This is the local Denisutline resource guide that shows some of our local wild plants. It's definitely worth seeing. It's unique. You won't find that anywhere else. And one final thing for this week, I just wanted to add at the very end of the video, I'm just mentioning 3 local gardening related businesses, and they're not sponsors. They don't know that I'm mentioning them. It's nothing like that. It's just they're all garden themed businesses that I've personally used and that have also partnered with the library in different ways. So I wanted to give them a shout out as this is the time of year that they're gearing up. So hope you guys have a great week. If you're able to get out and start gardening, I hope you have fun doing that. If you're still just dreaming about gardening, have fun with that too. Next week, my plan is to share a video that's all feel-good fiction, so I still have that theme in mind. And again, as always, if you want to get in touch, my email and our library information is at the end of the video. Have a great week. Happy reading. So while we're talking about gardening, I wanted to give a quick shout out to 3 local businesses that are also friends to the library. So Gardener's Junction is the greenhouse that we go to for almost everything that you see in the reading garden at the south branch of the library. And we've also gone to do container workshops there as staff for like a staff fun night out, and the wreath workshops closer to Christmas time. So they have a huge selection through several greenhouses, which is always really fun to visit and smells so good. And they've got lots of expertise and help, so be sure to ask when you're there. And you can see that they have things like pre-made hanging baskets, which look great in the garden and are super simple to take care of. The next one is Boreal Blooms, which is a local cut fresh flower business. So these are all flowers that are grown right here in Cold Lake. They order in the bulbs and the seeds from all over the world, so the variety is stuff that you won't necessarily see anywhere else, and really, really beautiful, really good quality that lasts a long time. And they have an option for subscription service, so you can sign up and get weekly flowers, and the library is actually one of the places you can go to pick up your flowers when they're ready. That subscription service tends to fill up really fast, so if you miss out on that, you can also generally catch them at the artisan market at Bean Trees. And of course, I don't know for sure what's happening with that this year, but just keep an eye out, and you can always get in touch directly with Heather at Boreal Blooms if you have questions. And the last one is Heaven's Berries, which is a local farm. So this is a place you can head out to do You Pick Berries on your own, or if you want, you can also do this program, CSA, Community Shared Agriculture, which is something that I've participated in for the last 7 years personally, and I've never been disappointed. You get all kinds of really beautiful produce that's just been freshly picked and locally grown and organic. And, you know, right now and continuing into the rest of the year, we'll probably be trying to reduce our number of trips to the grocery store. This is a great way to think about doing that. If you're not quite ready to consider a weekly subscription for this, you can also catch them at the local farmers market, so on Thursdays at the Agriplex.